So welcome to today. My name is Richard Curtis. I look after digital imaging here at Adobe in the UK. So I look after Photoshop, Lightroom and photography from photography point of view, but also from design and from a 3D perspective. And my main objective here is to talk to you a little bit about Creative Cloud and talk about 3D inside Photoshop in CS6. Before we get into Photoshop, just wanted to introduce Creative Cloud a little bit. There's a poll at the end just so I can know who's actually using Creative Cloud or has heard of Creative Cloud. So it will be, I thank you now to just to fill that in so we get an understanding of how many people are using Creative Cloud. So Creative Cloud is something that we launched in the market last year, and it's really around rejuvenating the creative market. We're seeing in the market a divergence of skills and a divergence of the way people want to present their media. So for example, photographers are buying new digital SLR cameras and wanting to experiment a little bit with video. We're seeing that newspapers and magazines are moving onto the iPad, and there's a new digital publishing revolution started. And also web designers are moving away from Flash and moving away into a HTML5 world. And really the idea around Creative Cloud is to provide all the tools that you need in one box to be able for you to get on with your job and actually work more productively and interchange between different media and different media ideas. So Creative Cloud is slightly different to a traditional cloud that you may know of from a Microsoft world or from an IBM world or whatever it may be. And it's kind of a hybrid cloud. If you think about it, you've got all the applications sit inside a portal, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. And you're able to download those files, as you always have done for many, many years, to your local computer. So nothing's changed there. You're still going to run the application on your local computer. However, where it starts to change is around delivery of updates to those applications. We're able to update those applications much more as they come out of engineering and quality control. We're able to release them into the market 3 or 4 times or so a year. That means that you're currently up to date with all the applications and all the updates. So it means you don't have to wait for a new version to make use of the current and existing features inside the applications. And one example was that in December, where we had the Create Now event, we released a whole load of new functionality into Photoshop around smart objects and copy CSS and many things that we won't go into today, but there's many things there as part of that. The other element to Creative Cloud is the Sync, Store, Share, and this is the ability to have storage in the cloud. Now, in the trial, you get a trial to Creative Cloud, which you can download for free for 30 days. You get 2 gig. If you're a subscriber, then you get 20 gig. And if you're a small medium business and want to work amongst your team, we have something called Creative Cloud for Teams, and with that you get 100 gig of storage. And the idea is that you have this cloud space as in a portal that you're able to upload and download files. And you can put any files in there, and we've got an example a little bit later on as I go into showing you what Creative Cloud looks like in the flesh. The other element, and we covered it in a session 2 weeks ago, was around digital publishing and the fact that every single subscriber to Creative Cloud now has an ability to create an interactive application for a digital tablet. For example, you can create now using InDesign content that goes on an iPad or an iPhone or an Android device or whatever that may be, and that's all free of charge. And there's a seminar on that that was 2 weeks ago. That's actually published today on my blog, which I'll cover a little bit later on. But there's also many other things as well inside the Creative Cloud that makes it really, really useful. I'm just going to get straight on to Creative Cloud now, because I know we've only got 45 minutes. So I'm trying to make use of that the best I can. So this is what Creative Cloud looks like from an applications point of view. Let me just minimize that screen. This is what Creative Cloud looks like from an applications point of view. You can see there you have a portal for all your applications. So you log into the Creative Cloud portal, you're able to see every single application that we have in Master Collection, and you can download that as you go along. There's a couple of special things in there and a couple of special things that we're going to do today, and that is around the Touch App plugins. These Touch App plugins enables me to use the Touch App on an iPad or an iPhone or on an Android device and be able to open those files inside Photoshop. So the idea is you download the plugin and install it into the applications using the Exchange plugin system within Creative Suite, and you're able to open the special files that we have on the mobile devices. We also have the Creative Cloud Connection Preview. The Cloud Connection Preview is the desktop synchronization, and you might be able to see at the top of my screen is the little blue arrows on the Creative Cloud, and that's synchronizing, and you'll see that synchronizing now because I've been moving some files around in my Creative Cloud, and that will synchronize automatically between our desktop and the Creative Cloud. That's what Creative Cloud is from that point of view. Let's now go into the files, so you can see the files in here. So in the files area, this pretty much looks like a Windows Explorer or a Mac, and it just shows you all my files that I have inside my Creative Cloud. And this is exactly the same as the files and the file structure that exists on my local computer. And you can see in there that the folder got a few people raising their hand, but I'm not sure exactly why. David, can you text me in if there's a problem? Otherwise, I'm just going to carry on. Let me just see if I can hear everything okay. 1, 2, 3? Okay, that's fine. Okay, so I'm just going to go into the folder that we're going to use today. And you can see I can navigate this just like a normal asset folder. You can see that I've got different types of files in there. Okay, so let me just show you. Thanks, David. Let me just show you the reason why Creative Cloud is slightly different. I'm going to go into test files. And in test files, you see there's many different file types. There's PDF, there's Illustrator files, and there's Photoshop files. And the main difference of Creative Cloud is that these files are rendered correctly inside Creative Cloud. And if you use PSD files, like for example in Photoshop, you're able to see all the layers and be able to work on those layers and ability to remove those layers and so you can see how that file was made up. If you have, say for example, an Illustrator file which is much more complex, within Illustrator you have a concept of artboards. It recognizes the artboards, it tells you that there's 3 pages, and you're able to navigate between all those pages. PDF, exactly the same. It will look at the PDF and bring out the pages, and it will enable me to look at each page completely individually. Okay? So there's a quick whiz around Creative Cloud and why Creative Cloud is a little bit different. So I'm just going to go now and open my iPad for you to see. And on my iPad, I'm just going to go into actually in Photoshop Touch. But I'll just close that down so you can see exactly what I've done. And I'm going into Photoshop Touch, and I'm going to create a new piece of artwork from Photoshop Touch. And it's now downloading the asset from Creative Cloud. Now this is a base that I want to work off. Now you can see it's already got some layers on there, but that's okay because I can just turn those layers off very quickly and remove them inside Creative Cloud, inside my application. Okay. So now I have my very small picture that I want to work on inside Photoshop and do some 3D work, but I may have some ideas, and rather than lose that ideas, I want to capture that and do something with it. So for example, I can, on this layer, use the brush, and I may want to have some kind of animal in this scene that I can use on my 3D in 3D. So I'm just going to draw on this layer. I draw on this layer a very, very strange looking animal. Okay, so you can see that it's giving me an idea of I want to have a little animal on this picture, but I also would like to have another layer which contains some text. So I could use my Photoshop Touch and choose text. And I can say, okay, well that text needs to read something like house and I'm going to say house and garden, so I just need to put another piece of text on there to say garden, and then just move those around. So it's giving me some kind of idea of what I want to create inside Photoshop. So it means I'm not going to lose that idea. Once I've finished with that piece of concept art, let's call it, I can then save that back to my Creative Cloud. This will save back to my local machine, and then it will automatically synchronize back to the Creative Cloud for me and be available when I need it. And you can see there it's actually saving now as we go along. And this file's probably quite big now because it's got lots of different layers in that it's saving. Now you know that Creative Cloud's running and the desktop and the connection's running because at the top you have these two little arrows, and those two little arrows are telling me that something is synchronizing back to the server. But to keep this demonstration moving along at a nice pace, that will do in the background, and I'm going to go to something that I've already created. Now I'm going to use my Wacom pen, and I'm just going to go to my Creative Cloud files, but I'm going to go to them on my local computer. So if I go up to the Creative Cloud connection, I can then launch the folder. And inside the folder you see exactly the same files that I have on my local machine as I have on my web portal. And that's the synchronization that runs. If I open up the CC seminar slide, you see I already have a file there that I've used, just because just in case of any problems with internet connections. Obviously this is going to be it's an internet-based service, so it's all reliant upon the internet. And I'm going to open this inside Photoshop, so I'm just going to drag this. Now notice it's a PSDX file, and that PSDX file will need to have the touch plugins installed before you can actually open the PSDX file inside Photoshop. So let's just maximize Photoshop here for a second, and it's got lots of layers that I don't need, so I'm just going to remove layers that I don't need just to clean this up. I need that one because that's my animal, but I don't need some of these. So there's the layers that I've got rid of. Now it's given me an idea of what I want to create on my 3D object. So let's get to work and look at Photoshop 3D. I'm going to close this tab group down and then zoom in. So Photoshop CS6 extended, and this is part of Creative Cloud. So if you are using Creative Cloud, you do have Photoshop 6 extended, so you know no more of the having to just use the standard version of Photoshop. We've completely rewritten the whole 3D engine, enabling me to work on the 3D engine without actually having any barriers of technology get in the way. So it's really simplified the way I can use it, but actually really quite powerful. And the first thing I'm going to do is to take my text tool and draw on Photoshop just a little marquee and just put some text in there. And I'm going to go with what I suggested before. I'm going to say house, and I'm going to miss off the ampersand for a second because I need to do something else in a while and show you something else. So I'm going to change the font size of that. Okay. Once that's now in place, I can now get rid of the two other layers that I don't need and work on just this layer. I'm now going to move to the Move tool, and I can then move this to where I need it to be inside the scene. Now I'm just going to move it out of the way for a second, because what I need to do is I need to make sure this fits in the scene as well as being a 3D object. So in the 3D panel, I'm able to convert this layer into a 3D extrusion. I can also create it from the 3D panel. So I can create a 3D extrusion from this layer and say create. this will go and create me that 3D object and that 3D extrusion. You can see there, very different to CS5, you're not having to go and create shadow planes and vanishing point grids and all this other kind of thing that you needed to create in CS5. In CS6, it creates a lot of things for you. Sorry, it doesn't create a vanishing point plane. I'm going to come to that in a second. But what I can do is I can grab onto my my text, in this case, my 3D extrusion, and I can use this little widget, and you can see there in the top right hand corner the actual iPad has synchronized now with this through desktop sync, has synchronized back to my local machine. So you saw that in running across. Okay, so while I'm in here, I can actually move the 3D extrusion up and down. I can make it larger. I can also go side to side. And this little widget is very handy. Now notice this is all on the Move tool. It's not on any other tools to select outside the Move tool. The Move tool also gives me a couple of other options as well. If I press the V key or use the 4 options on the Properties menu up here, I can move between different states of this widget. And I can now change the extrusion in real time. If I drag the extrusion, you can see that moving across and moving around. I can also change the taper, the bend, and the twist, and that's something you can try at home or in the studio later. If I press the V key again, you can now change the beveling, and you can also change the inflation and the inflation strength, which I'll come onto in a little while. But first of all, I want to just make sure this is in the right position inside this scene. So I'm just going to make sure I'm on the current view, and on the current view I can move that object around in real time. Now this is on the graphics processor, so one of the things that we did in CS6 is that we moved a lot of operation onto the graphics processor. So things like Liquify, the Puppet Warp tool, 3D, and many other options were moved on the graphics processor, which means that Photoshop runs much faster, and it's not going to, the CPU is not going to get in the way. Now that I've done that, I want to then change or create a new vanishing point, and I can do that very easily by going into the 3D menu and going to Filter menu and going to Vanishing Point. The Vanishing Point will take me into the Vanishing Point mode, where I can now create my Vanishing Point grid. I'm just going to zoom into the Vanishing Point grid by pushing the Command and the plus key or the Control plus key on a PC and use a space bar to move that around. I'm then going to use this grid down here, or this little patio, to create me a 3D grid that will map my 3D objects onto the 2D scene. So it's going to create me a 3D space. By doing this, will create me a vanishing point which Photoshop can then map to. Now nothing's happened because we haven't changed the view. If we change the view, and we can change the view in multiple places, we can change the view here in Vanishing Point Grid mode, or we can right click over here and we can change Vanishing Point Grid. Whichever option we choose, Photoshop then moves this automatically into the right orientation for this 2D scene. I'm then able to move this up and down. But you see there that the camera actually is in the wrong place. So I need to open the second view. So I go into Show, go into the View menu, Show, 3D Secondary View, and you can now see my second view. And this is showing me the top view, but I want to show the Vanishing Point Grid view. And you can see that this is completely mirroring where my text is in the scene. And I can very quickly move this down to keep my orientation and then transfer that to the main grid. So it means that then this object and this text is now in the right place on this scene for me to go and move it into position. I can now just grab hold of my widget and move this into position. Before I move that right into position, I want you to just notice just underneath there, you can see the shadows. So Photoshop CS6 has created me the shadows automatically. Now if I click on my lights at the top, and I can create new lights of course, but in real time I can move my lighting around to match the scene. And you see the shadows moving in real time underneath the text. I can also use Shift, and if I choose Shift on the lights, I can move that more freely than I can just by using the actual main light source. I click back on the actual text again in the 3D object. You can see the cage has appeared. I can now snap that to the grid because it may have moved. So I can say 3D snap object to ground plane, and it will then move it and place it into position where the grid needs to be. I can then move this backwards a little bit and put it into position where I want it to be. I actually want it to be slightly in the way of these bushes because I want to show you something in a few seconds. Now, it may be that to make this look a bit more realistic, I need to have the ampersand, because the ampersand is joining these two words together. So I need to go and edit this text source. So rather than having to go and recreate my 3D object, I can very quickly, and this is what Photoshop is very, very good at, is by going back to edit the main source of the 3D object. And you can see that it's brought me into the internal PSB file that I'm now using to edit the text. I'm going to place the ampersand sign and press OK. That will save it back, and I need to save that into the PSB file itself, and then you will see it automatically reflect into my 3D object. Okay, so what I may want to do is to texture this and play around with some texturing options. So I'm going to press the V key and just click on the text in the 3D extrusion and go to the Properties panel. And in the Properties panel, you can see I have multiple types of material. Okay? These are there by default. So it means I can then apply something like a metal silver brushed to my 3D scene. And you may be able to see there, if I zoom in, you can see there it's now applied a slight texture. Just click back onto the 3D layer again. And I can also navigate on the right-hand side on the 3D object. I can navigate exactly which element of the 3D. So notice I've got the front elevation, the bevel, extrusion, the back bevel. I can go into each one and manually change them as I need to and manually select them as I need to do, because I may need to put different properties on each one. I'm able to go in and change the color of the diffuse layer, and I can now go in and pick up, say, a blue, so I can match it to my background. You can also see there that you have the 32-bit color picker. So in CS6 in December, we enhanced 3D inside CS6 to include high illumination. So you can now overexpose on a piece of text or extrusion that will ultimately reflect against other objects in the scene. So keep that there, that's fine. And I may want to look at the inflation of this object. So I'm going to click on it and press the V key and go to the third option, look at the inflation. And if I zoom in while I'm doing the inflation, you should be able to see it's inflating the front bevel of this 3D object, but keeping the texture as well. As an extra item, you may want to also load in a new texture, which you can. You can load a brand new texture in, and that will overlay it. So let's just pick up a texture. Here's a texture that I'm going to use. It's just of a JPEG image, and I pick this up. I'm going to put this on top of the texture. Why has it not done that? Let me just replace that again. Okay, for some reason it hasn't picked up. You can overlay a JPEG onto the front of this. So for argument's sake, I'm just going to leave that as it is for now. The options down here are how the light is going to reflect and hit the text. So for example, the shine is about how much reflection I'm going to get from the lights. You've got reflection. You can change how soft and how rough the texture is of the actual text elements, the bump mapping, the opacity, and any refraction that you may have. Once you've got this looking exactly how you want it to look like, you can then go to the marquee tool and very quickly put a render option in, and you can then select the text and render this, and this will perform a ray trace on the 3D extrusion itself and will throw light into it, and that will then render out. So in final comps, you'll probably need to have a render done, which will then look much better than just a preview that you're working with. So you can see that's looking pretty nice. At any point in time, I can stop the render by just touching the back of the image and then turn off this selection. You can see that's quite a nice render. Now what I also need to do is to be able to move this @ sign, but I want to move this @ sign independently of moving the rest of the text around, because I want to move it and make sure it links up these two words. So in the 3D option, I have something called split extrusion, and split extrusion will completely break apart that extrusion for me and enable me to work individually on each object. So I can now move this into place. Notice it's interacting with the other elements in the 3D extrusion, so I can actually make this look like it's actually joined by maybe increasing the size of this object as well, and just repositioning it where it needs to be in the scene, which is about there. Okay. Now, excuse me. It may be, you see down here on the actual N, it's clipping a little bit of the bush. So what I want to do is put a mask on here. So I'm just going to put a mask on using the mask option at the bottom of the layers palette, and then I'm going to paint with black. Now why? To show me everything through that 3D layer. Black is going to conceal it. So I'm going to move to the brush mode using the B key, and then press the D key to switch, or to reset the black and white foreground and background targets, and then change it to be a black brush, so black being the foreground. I can press the X key to switch those two apart. I can then paint out that 3D text and have it so that it completely interacts with that scene and it blends into that scene for me. So I'm pretty happy with my 3D object in there, but I want to actually do something with my ladybird. So I'm going to go to my 3D layer, and I'm going to say new 3D layer from file. And I'm going to go to a folder which contains my 3D objects. And just hopefully I can find that very quickly. Okay, 3D objects and textures. Inside here, I've got quite a few things, but one of the things I've got is my ladybird. And for some reason, I can't open that anymore. There we go. So there's my ladybird, an OBJ file. So this came in from a different application. I think it came in from 3D Max, I think it came in from. So bring it in from there, bring that mesh in, and just put that mesh straight into my scene. Now obviously that's on a completely different layer, as you can see down the layers palette. So I need at some point to merge these two layers together. I also need to get rid of my very poor drawing of a ladybird, get him out of the way, but at least it gave me some ideas what I wanted to do. Using the V key, I can then go to my ladybird layer and start moving this around. So I can start dragging the ladybird around in real time and moving this, or slightly moving it into position where I think it needs to be. And I quite like him down here. He's obviously way, way too big, but that's okay for now. I want to merge these two to layer because I want it to share the same light source, and I want them to interact with each other if they need to interact with each other. So to do that, I'm just going to use the Command key to select both those 3D layers. Then the 3D menu, choose Merge 3D Layers. That will then take the light source of the original lighting element, that's of the 3D text, and apply that light source to my ladybird. I can then click on individual items in that mesh, in that full mesh. Okay, so I can click on my ladybird, or I can click on the individual elements of my text and move them independently around. But I want to work on my ladybird for now. And I'm going to change the size. So I'm going to go to the scale and change the scale of this and put him down where he needs to be. Okay, just move him into position. And then I just want to go to my lights again and just recheck my light source. And you can see that the light's changing both the text and the ladybird. Now the ladybird isn't on the ground plane, but that's okay for now. I'm going to keep him there. I can hide the ground plane if it's getting in the way. I can say View, show, and move the ground plane away, and I won't see that anymore, so it leaves a nice clear working space for me. If I go to my 3D object, you can see now in there I have two groups, one group for my text and one group for my ladybird. Now the ladybird was brought in from a different package, and depending on how that was created may give me access to certain elements of that object. So for example, I can go to the head and the body and the wings and the thorax, and for each one I can go and change the image that's mapped onto that part of the object. So if I go to my properties panel and look at the textures, I can replace the texture with the ladybird head. And you can see there it's just brought in a very simple object. Now that is just a light blocking image. So it's just show you that again. So the head is just basically a square with two holes that will bring through the base layer as his eyes, and everything else will be masked out. So any object can go on the back of this, as I was showing you slightly before. I can then go change the body and change and replace the texture and bring in a different body. I choose the wings. No, it's the wrong one, but it doesn't matter. And the wings, I'm going to choose the wings for. We need to go find some wings. Let's go find some wings. Okay, and the thorax. I can go in and replace each one of these and put them directly one. Now these came straight from the web. Okay, so there's the thorax, and bring the thorax in. Now I can quickly go and check my mesh. I can go to my my marquee tool, and I can then draw a marquee around this ladybird, and I can then render it. Okay. This will now go and throw light into that ladybird and throw in that light source. But the benefit of doing this is that I've got a single light source now for this scene, and I may want to intensify the lighting. So to intensify the lighting, I can go to the environment layer of that 3D object and go to the image-based light. In the image-based light, I can go and replace or load a texture. I'm going to load in this texture, which is just a gradient map. So white's going to show light through, black's going to block it, so it's just basically a gradient, and I open this through. And you'll see there the change as it comes through. You're now seeing the IBL in place. Okay? If I now go back to my environment layer, it will now go to my IBL, and the IBL can now move around, and now can I change the inner lighting of this object, how it's been represented by the IBL, by this gradient layer. At any point in time, I can go and change the gradient, and it'll go and change that image-based light, and the filter I'm applying to it, it will go and change the look and feel of the lights as they are on the image. If I go to my current view now, it looks slightly differently, and if I click on the object and go to the properties panel of the ladybird, go to my 3D objects, I can go and change the way that the the wings are reacting against the light. So you can see here that this has got much more impact now. If I go and change the amount of shine and reflection, you can see how that's being impacted on the actual 3D object. So I can then do a quick render. And it'll now finish off. It tells me down in the bottom left-hand corner the time this will take for the render to complete. Okay. Once that's finished, I will then have a finished 3D document that I can then save. I could then push that back to Creative Cloud, or I could do whatever I need to do to that object. I can also even animate 3D if I need to animate using the new video inside CS6. But hopefully that's give you a kind of a preview of the things you can do inside Photoshop. So just to recap there, you've got a great text engine inside Photoshop CS6. You can place texturing, you can place lighting on that 3D extrusion. You can also change the source and change the text without having to go back and redefine the 3D extrusion. And you can also drop in 3D objects from a different package straight into Photoshop CS6. And there's a whole variety of things you can bring in there on the file system. So just to recap, File, new 3D layer from File. You can bring in lots of different types there. So you may want to go to something like a Thingiverse or a 3D library, and you can bring those in and add them into your comp. Thanks, guys. Well, if that's all, thank you very much for attending today. It's been great to demonstrate that to you, and I'll see you next time.